You're now listening to Hack and Grow Rich with Shaahin and his co-host Bart Baggett, where we discuss hacking your way to success and the unconventional paths to unreasonable success with the people who've been there. And now, the author of Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult, Shaahin.
This is Hack and Grow Rich. This is the place you need to be if you like to be rich and happy. My name's Bart Baggett. My co-host Shaahin. I always say that with the Texas accent. I can't. If I talk to my parents, it just bleeds Texas accent. I know it's not the proper Persian enunciation. So yeah, this is a cool program. We're going to have an interesting guest today. We generally talk about business, entrepreneurship, and other things related to sort of a shortcut to success, but a lot of psychology. I think today we're going to be talking about mental health and psychology and some of the burdens that us people that decide to, run our own business run into. Shaahin, good to see you, man. Thanks for putting it all live.
Good to see you, Bart. What's new? Tell me what's going on. I know you got a new comedy show coming out, which I love.
Yeah, I've been writing some new material, and so I'll be in LA doing the Haha Cafe with some new material. And then I'm actually going on a marketing cruise. I'm actually going to take the risk of living in a COVID bubble, go on a cruise with a bunch of marketing guys in the Caribbean and do about 20 minutes of comedy and, kind of building that foundation for that Netflix special. And it's funny because, this is just one of those bucket list things. I'm not sure I'll ever make any money from it, but it's hard and it's good and it's satisfying. And I think I'm a better trainer when I'm studying comedy. My timing's a little bit sharper when I'm on my Zoom calls.
So it's interesting that you talk about that. And actually, this is something that I want to talk to Dr. Moss about. And I think there comes Dr. Moss. There he is, Dr. Fred Moss. Hi, welcome.
Shaahin, how you doing today?
Good. So we're going to give a little bit of an introduction. So just hang tight. Bart and I will usually talk for a few moments, and then we'll give you a little bit of an introduction, and then you can come on. We're doing great. But actually, as Bart and I were talking about right now, Bart is about to go on you said a marketing cruise? Is that what you called it?
Yeah, like 400 marketers, and instead of just a bunch of lectures in a hotel room, they go on a cruise and network. And then I'm one of the headline comedians. And yet it's funny because, 20 years ago, I was the headline speaker about marketing and radio and TV.
We're about to go live this evening with... Yeah.
Got a little reverb there.
So I think it's Dr. Moss might be playing something. So Dr. Moss, I'll just mute you and then I'll ask you to unmute once we're ready for you to come on. Dr. Moss, who I like to think of him as many things, quite an amazing individual with a really deep backstory that particularly at this time, I think really strikes a nerve, because we always talk about foundational thinking when we're on Hack and Grow Rich, Bart. And I know we talk about how you need to have the pillars of financial success to succeed. You need to have money in cash flow positive real estate. You need to have money on Amazon. You need to have money you need to have money invested in the markets, gaining revenue for you. And then you also need to have a career, something that's relaxing you and allowing you to do all that cool stuff. But here's the interesting thing. I think that similarly with how your finances need to be as diversified as possible, your physical health, your mental health has to be solidified. It has to be balanced. And I think that's a 4-pillar type thing, which is why I asked Dr. Moss on. He's very high in demand and we're very fortunate to get him on. I mean, if you can imagine after COVID, the demand for clinical psychiatrists, people in mental health has been through the roof. Dr. Moss, I know, has been busy writing, and he works with patients in his program, which I'm sure he'll talk about, Welcome to Humanity. But in general, I think one of the interesting parts that we can talk about tonight is, my psychologist who I've been seeing, who's a clinical hypnotist, gave me a book on shadow work. And I didn't even know that this was a thing. And it was written by one of these Jungian guys. I forget who it is. You probably know the book. And it talks about shadow. And I always found that fascinating, that how there could be a part of our psyche that if ignored comes back uglier that comes back and can dominate our lives. So I know for you, Bart, you do comedy, which is your outlet. For me, I make prank calls. People don't know this about me all the time. And this is a funny thing. I make these epic prank calls. I mean, I've got multiple characters. I mean, I really, go all out there. And lately, a kid that I've been mentoring, I send it to him because it just brightens up his day, because he sees me as the serious business guy or whatever. And I send him these videos where I'm doing a Iranian accent, or I'm doing a Russian accent or whatever. And I'm just randomly calling people or calling scammers back, that have the credit card scams, IRS scams, and it's a blast. But we recently got a film deal, and he was in the room playing it when the producers for the film walked into the room. And so I'm sitting at lunch. We're having a business lunch talking about the movie and distribution and who the director should be and who they feel should play me. And all of a sudden the guy goes, "And dude, you got to make more of those phone calls. I love it." And I was like, "Oh my God, what? You guys heard that?" But I realized after I read that shadow book that for me, that's a way of dealing with my shadow. So guys, without further ado, I am going to let you guys meet Dr. Fred Moss, who's an incredible individual and a better looking version of John Malkovich on the outside. I'm just going to say. Welcome, Dr. Moss.
It's great to be here, Shaahin. That's really great. I love the story about prank calls, and you're never too old to make a really good prank call. I used to love doing that, and you just brought up an old, it's an old standby for me. When I was a teenager, I got really, really good. I'd love to hear a little bit of what you've learned how to do it as an adult, because it's a really cool way to pass your time. So I'm interested in that type of shadow work, and we'll talk after the show and see how I might be able to improve my prank game.
Oh yeah. Oh, well, we do take requests, and by we, I mean my multiple characters. I'll probably end the show, Bart. We'll probably both end the show with a diagnosis. But listening to Dr. Moss, and I've done a deep dive into Dr. Moss this week, and really taken a good listen to some of the material you put out there, and the thing I realized is that there is more to you than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to get to. So tell me how you started. You are not. So guys, everybody on the show, I want you guys to understand, because I did not understand this. Okay. A counselor, a psychologist is not the same as a psychiatrist. And all those are valid. Somebody who's like your life coach, whatever, we poke fun at that from time to time. It's different than a clinical psychiatrist. A psychiatrist, if I'm not mistaken, you are an MD. You are a medical doctor. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. I went to medical school at Northwestern University from 1984 to 1988 in downtown Chicago, Illinois, and I never had a better time in a city than I did in Chicago, Illinois for those 4 years. Just great.
Yeah,
great.
Psychiatrists go through residency, you go through the ER, like you're real doctors, and then you go, dude. Let's talk about the mind in medicine. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was in a surgical rotation, a pediatric rotation, an OB rotation. I had the whole gamut, and I graduated medical school just like any orthopedic surgeon or proctologist that you might know.
All right. So you're not a life coach. We've got that down, guys. So the person we're talking to right now, so is a medical doctor. One of the most renowned in his field. I think at a certain point, you said you were seeing thousands of patients. Is that right?
Well, over the course of years, there are some years where I saw upwards of 1,500 or 2,000 patients. But Shaahin, if you want to be honest about it, basically, sometimes some of those patients were either 10 seconds or 30 seconds at a time if I was seeing just kind of buzzing through nursing homes or emergency rooms or stuff. So these are people who, if you include them, the ones who knew me for just enough time for me to meet them and check on them, then the numbers got to about 40,000 over the time from 1990 up until now.
Wow, I think that's about as many girlfriends as Bart has had.
Yeah. Just this year.
Yeah. You and Wilt, huh, Bart? Yeah.
Trying to heal a deep wound of insecurity by all the 40,000 women. I am very upfront about it.
If you ever do the math on those, like you listen to Wilt Chamberlain or some of those other guys, and you just do the math on it, and the math is just mind blowing.
Mind boggling.
For some of those guys, it's like, you're like, okay, so that's 3 to 5 women a day, every day without a break for 20 years? Like,
Exactly.
all right. So we digress, as we do often on the show. So, okay. So let's get back to the more serious topic here. And guys, for any of you guys joining us on Facebook, we will be taking questions and answers. So please save your questions and answers and ask them in the comments below on Facebook. And you can direct them to Dr. Moss, Bart, or myself, and we will be delighted to answer those for you. So, okay. So you, and this is where I think the story gets really interesting for me. So you are a doctor, you get school debt, you go to school, you get into the system, you do those things that are expected of you.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the way, you have a splinter in your mind. There's something that's bugging you. So tell us from that point, which is where I think your story starts to ramp up, what happened?
Sure. So I really have to start at a point shorter than that, lower or more long ago than that. So I went to college at the University of Michigan, hoping that I would finally find, smart people up to good stuff and maybe make a life for myself. And it didn't work out that way. So in 1980, I dropped out. 1979, I dropped out, and I came to California and tried to find my life and decided that wasn't going to work. I tried again. I dropped out again. And that was it. I was done with college in 1980. I was never going to go back. And I came home and told my mom that I would never go back. And she instead got me she's like, Fred, well, you got to get a job. Shaahin, moms will be that way. They think you got to work and stuff. And so I was like, Mom, and she, no, Fred, really? I was like, okay. Well, I got to buy a car so I can drive around the country and figure out what my life is about. So maybe I'll take a job. And I got a job as a child care worker at a state hospital in Pontiac, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. And there I was actually, I stayed for 3 weeks. That was just long enough to have enough money. And I decided to continue on to work with these children. I worked with kids from 12 to 18. And I was reminded while I was working that communication, connection, conversation, listening, self-expression, these type of things have healing qualities that far exceed anything that most people imagine. So I was really enjoying being with the kids, so I stayed on for a little longer and stayed on for a little longer. Shaahin, the thing that really bothered me the most was the way that doctors were treating the children. We would call the doctor and say, the child's agitated. Maybe he was up too late, or maybe he got in a fight with a peer, or maybe he said no to a nurse or something. And the doctor would come and interview the patient, maybe like for 5 or 20 seconds, and then write a prescription. And then we'd have to hold the kid down and inject him full of drugs. And there was just something about that that just absolutely made my stomach turn every time that it happened. It just seemed like it was so rude and so inhumane. And I saw that and was part of that enough times that I finally made a decision that it was time for me to go back to school and actually become a psychiatrist and bring conversation, communication, and connection to psychiatry in a way that I think it was meant to be in the first place. Now, while I was in my medical school in Chicago, this drug that you may have heard of before, especially you, Shaahin, a drug called Prozac was introduced to the world. And for the next 12 years, it was the #1 most prescribed drug, all specialties included, in all of medicine. And, I suppose, I'm not even sure which of our 2 drugs was selling more, but that's a story for another time as well. So it was around that time that we were really, all of psychiatry became biological psychiatry while I was there. So all of a sudden I was finding myself being trained to deliver medications, the exact thing that I went to school so that I wouldn't have to do. Now I was learning to be an expert pharmacologist, an expert psychopharmacologist, and I did that and did that and did that and stayed conventional enough so that I couldn't be dismissed. But the whole time, every medication prescription that I wrote kind of twisted my soul. There was like a sacrifice of my soul with every single medication prescription that I wrote. But I continued and continued, hoping that I would find some medicine that maybe I liked or maybe that it worked. Well, over time, that never really happened. These medicines don't work very well. They tend to perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat. So approximately 2006, after quite a life, actually, between 1990 and 2006, I decided to make a difference and started taking people off of medication. And I think that's the splinter that you're talking about here. That's the point where things started to change fundamentally for me. As I took people off their medications, well, they got better reliably. And then they got way better reliably. And then their actual diagnosis, their condition lifted. Like what they thought they had, they didn't have. And this started to happen on a regular basis. So I was like, wow, these medications might be perpetuating the symptoms they're marketed to treat. So I started really playing with that and taking a little bit more people off meds, and sure enough, they got better. And then I took a little higher risk people off of meds, and sure enough, they got better. And it was really like, well, what am I going to do? Because I can't keep prescribing meds that are going to make people worse. So I went through the next several years just kind of trying to figure out what's going on here, continuing to be a conventional psychiatrist so that I could continue conversations inside the middle of the medical complex and, inside the middle of the medical industry, And I began to really take people off of medicine and become a stand for people who were, actually maybe not as mentally ill, or perhaps not even mentally ill as people think they were. I love being in the streets. I share that with you. I love being in the streets. I love being with people who are just grounded. And I really got to the point where I could see humans for who they were. And I was back to communicating and connecting and conversing and, sharing and listening with these people. And it was looking eye to eye. And I began to really pull people off of medicine to be less interested in prescribing. And then over the last few years, I've even changed that, realizing that medicines themselves were not the problem. What was really the problem was this notion that we were diagnosing people as being mentally ill, and we were using very vague criteria to make that decision. And then once we were diagnosing them and medicating them, indeed, we made them mentally ill, and then we could support with evidence if they were sick.
Wow. And I believe that, right? Because I think there's definite vested interests in this country alone. And it's always evident when you go overseas and you walk into a pharmacy and you're like, how much is da medicine? They're like 23 cents for a bottle. And you're like, whoa, wait a second. Like I've got an insurance copay. I got a this and a this. So, all right. So let's hold on to that thought for just 1 second. I want to come back. So let's put a bookmark here. On Hack and Grow Rich, we talk about unconventional workarounds, which is how we define a hack, an unconventional workaround to life's challenges or life's problems. And Bart and I have given lots of hacks to that stuff. So now the part that I find very interesting about this at this point is that I teach my students on my Amazon Mastery course, and the kids that I mentor, and I say kids, I mean, these are young startup people in Silicon Valley. I feel old when I say kids, but I like to say that sometimes. So when I mentor them, I teach them about professionals. And professionals, I don't care who it is, if it's a doctor or a lawyer or an attorney or an accountant, they work for us. We don't work for them. Okay. And we use them tactically, not habitually. We use them as a tool. They enter into our reality distortion field. We tell them what the end result is that we want to achieve, and then we achieve that. So I've got students who call me and they're like, oh my God, I talked to this lawyer and he said that this lawsuit is very serious and there's nothing I can do and I just have to pay them. And I say, you know what you do? You tell them to fuck off and you find a lawyer that tells you what you want done. Mm-hmm. Oh, my accountant, he says, if we do this thing, then I'll get audited and it'll be difficult and whatever. Tell that guy to fuck off and find an accountant that'll do what you want to do within reason. Don't be stupid, but you want to be intelligent. So I'm starting to get the feeling that at this point in your story, you kind of have come to the partial understanding that you as a medical doctor, somebody who has taken this oath that there's more to the practice of medicine than just prescribing drugs. Now, this has been a very lucrative thing for you. You've been making money. You've been living a good life. You've got your pension. You've got your 401ks. You got the house, the car. All that stuff is going good for you. Your Jewish mom is like, she's loving you, man. This is like, my son is a doctor. Like Bart and I always talk about, Persian parents. They're always like, My son is a doctor. It's the best thing in the world. You are at the pinnacle of success. So at some point, Dr. Moss, something flipped inside of you. What was it? Did you take LSD? What was the thing that made you be willing to give up the security, to sign out of this life of TikTok, going along with one of my old teachers used to always call it TikTok, what everybody wants you to do, come on in, prescribe the benzodiazepam, okay, get your check at the end of the week, check in once a minute. Well, you said no. You said something's wrong with this structure. Yeah. So what happened? What happened that changed that for you? What was that transformative moment for you?
Yeah. Well, in 2006, there was a lot of challenges, as it turned out, and I'm trying to see if I can actually pick out a moment. But there was reason for me to back up into my field and rethink whether or not I even needed or wanted to stay a doctor. There were some challenges from the board. I had a DUI in 2002, and they ran me through a bunch of shit in 2006 that had nothing to do with anything, and it was kind of like a little bit of a hazing, a little bit of a witch hunt, and it was rough. And it was an opportunity for me to walk out of the field rather than just face the music directly. So instead, I did face the music directly, but in the meantime, really had to start looking at what the hell am I doing with my life? What am I doing? Am I cheating? Am I lying? Am I behind my own enemy lines? Am I causing the problems that I'm here to solve? Am I just taking the money and doing whatever I'm doing to actually be my own enemy? And so it really got even louder in 2006 and every year since then, that each diagnosis I made, I didn't believe. And each medicine that I gave, I knew was going to make the person worse. And when they came back and blamed me for getting worse or for not giving them enough medicine and shit like that, it was enough to just drive me wild. Like, okay, if I give you more medicine, you're going to get worse. And then they'd get really furious. And I'd be like, okay, here we go. I'm going to give you more medicine and then you're going to get worse. And then, there was so much, so much sidestepping and jiving going on in every single interaction that I was having. And where the pain was, Shaahin, I would say, is the recognition of my soul. That's really what was happening. Like I was living a true and honest, duplicitous life. True and honest, but totally duplicitous. I was doing things that were flat against what I knew was right, and I was doing that every day. And frankly, after a little while, whether you're making $200, $2,000, or $20,000 an hour, that ends up being really trying. And some people do it and they do it the rest of their life, but there was something about it. It was like, you know what, screw this. I don't want to keep doing it. And that's when I began backing out of the maze. The truth is, Shaahin, this upcoming Saturday, I think that's October 1st, will be the last day that I ever perform as a conventional psychiatrist. And as of this next Saturday, right now I have a job that's 2 hours a week. That job is done as of Saturday. And I now get to call myself a former psychiatrist. And the backing out of that maze over the last 15 years is way more interesting than what it took to get in.
Amazing. Okay, so let's go back to where we were, because I really needed to know that. Bart and I always talk about transformative experiences, how they change us. So, all right, so now you are at a place where you're like, fuck this. Like, I can't keep medicating people. Your colleagues must have been shocked, because I know doctors talk and they have colleagues and peers and people you publish stuff with. How were they reacting to you?
It's a matter of tiptoeing around. In a little ways, it isn't like I came right out on the bully pulpit and screamed it from the mountaintops. They knew where I was standing, and I continued at times to do things that were against my better judgment because that was being called for. I think you're a vegan. I like to.
Definitely not a vegan, doc.
Okay, you were there for a little bit, huh? Like you were once a vegan.
During my foolish days.
During your foolish days. Well, it would be like a vegan working at Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know what I mean? And that's not going to work that good, actually. He's like doing his very best, but he's a vegan, and every time comes in and they want a 3-piece, and the guy says, dude, you shouldn't be eating fried food. Like a raw vegan. You shouldn't be eating chicken. You shouldn't be eating any, you wouldn't last at that job very long, even though you're a high-powered vegan. For me, that's what was going on. I was kind of walking the walk to keep the golden handcuffs on, but flying against who I was. It's true, I needed the money, or so I thought, and I loved the power and the prestige, but it wasn't consistent with where my heart and my soul was, and I really got to discover where my heart and soul was, and that's where I find myself now aligned more so with who I am and who I get to be.
So we're going to get to that. And I definitely want to talk about that. One of the things that I thought was very interesting with one of the interviews that you did was that you said something, I think, pretty poignant to exactly the point that you're making now. And that was that once you stop medicating people and you saw people getting better, and by the way, guys, neither me nor Bart are doctors, and so please consult with your doctor. Sure. Dr. Moss is not giving medical advice on the show. So this is just for entertainment purposes only. Always consult with a doctor. We're going to give that to you guys so you don't end up suing us if something goes wrong and you decide to take our medical advice. Definitely don't listen to me. I've got the sophistication of a chimpanzee. Bart is a little more sophisticated, and Dr. Fred Moss is actually a doctor, but not giving medical advice again on this show. So the thing that you said, which in fewer words, I thought was that you came to this profound realization that humans are not broken. And that the current structure of how people are treated, how medicine is handled in this country, how drugs are dished out willy-nilly to anybody as a easy solution, whereas they're not curatives. They in most cases they fix the symptoms occasionally, but not the cause. And you came to this realization that not only drugs may not be necessary, but in fact, the condition may be a ghost.
Yeah. Exactly.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the whole idea of psychiatric diagnosis, and frankly, I could go into other subspecialties as well, but I've been advised by coaches in the past and colleagues in the past to stay with psychiatry since that is my major specialty. The whole idea of these diagnoses they're a contrived conversation. That sometimes the diagnoses come up even like after the treatments are created. So the whole idea that there is some degree of normalcy and that there is some degree of abnormalcy is based on the notion that we know what normal is. In truth, I've never even met anybody who's able to tell me what normal is. So it's kind of ludicrous that we would have any kind of confidence that there was such thing as abnormal. On top of that, if we look at the people that we might call abnormal in downtown Los Angeles, these are not the same people who might be called abnormal somewhere else. There's people who in other countries or other cultures would be maybe labeled as having the same condition but been given a gift. Perhaps they would move into shaman, or in some cases they might even become a president of a country. And there's a real opportunity to see that it's culturally specific, it's temporally specific, and in fact, it's not even specific. It's very vague on the edges. So what I mean by that is that's why people who are in the psychiatric system for a long time are usually sporting 6, 8, 10, or 12 diagnoses, because they've seen enough doctors who have just thrown whatever they have thrown on them, and then they walk away as if they have an actual diagnosis. As it turns out, these diagnoses are just contrived conversations. And look, for the same listeners that you just gave the disclaimer to, I want to say one thing about this, because sometimes this gets misheard. I in no way am diminishing the pain and suffering and misery of these people who are having a life that is not working. This is not saying something like, it's in your head, get over it. It is not saying like you're not upset or you're not uncomfortable. I completely get how uncomfortable people can be. 40,000 patients later, I've had my share of seeing some significant discomfort. This is not to reduce that. What it is to go to, however, is what you were just saying, which is People are not inherently broken. People are just like you and I and like everyone else trying to figure out what to do with our next step in this crazy world, and sometimes making good decisions along those lines and sometimes not making good decisions along those lines. And that's just what humanity is about. So when I started treating people like people and not like some sort of measure of whether or not they were defective, that's when massive healing started happening between me and my clients and my patients.
Wow. So, and I get that, I'll tell you, in my early 20s, I was watching a film. It was like one of those action films. And all of a sudden my heart starts bumping. Right. And I was like, oh my God, I've been poisoned. I was sure I had like a little bit of nausea and like my heart was beating. I was sweating and I was generally like cool as a cucumber. So I was like, what the fuck is this? And so I was like, I'm going to go to a gastro doctor. I went to a gastro doctor and the guy just looked at me and he's like, dude, you're just having panic attacks. He's like, and I was like, what is that? What's a panic attack? And he's like, you're having panic attacks. He's like, I'm like, okay, well, how do you get rid of those? And he said, oh, well, that's not a problem. I'll just give you these meds. Mm-hmm. And he wrote me these meds for, I think it was benzodiazepam or something like that. I'm sure. And this is coming from a gastro doctor. And so I got the bottle of pills. And I remember I was in San Francisco. I flew out to San Francisco on someone's private jet because there was some big thing I was doing there. And they started coming on again, the panic attacks. And I was like, fuck, man, it was really hard. I mean, I felt like debilitated. There you go. That's good. And I remember
debilitated, by the way. It's just not a word, but it's a good word.
Like I said, I've got the sophistication of a chimpanzee, doc. So I took one of the pills and I remember sitting on the bed and I remember having this very same realization that you're having, which was, wait a second, like this just makes me feel like a freaking zombie. And, I'm the kind of guy where I took half a pill. The guy told me to take 2. I took half of one of those things. And I'm just sitting going, oh my God, I feel numbed out. Like that part is numbed out. And I thought to myself, like, fuck, man, I feel like something's been taken from me. Yeah. I feel like somebody took this pain that I could deal with, like you're saying, I realized in that moment that I wasn't a broken fucking person, but this was an experience that I was having along my journey for a reason. And I took the entire bottle, threw it in the trash, never took that stuff again. And then I did different things like havening, meditation, different tactics to disassociate the feelings. And then later, shadow work and learning about the shadow and those types of things. And I managed to resolve it. But from what you're saying, it's making sense to me that stress, that panic, that anxiety became a part of me. And rather than it being a thing that weakens me as a human, it's something that gives me strength. Mm-hmm. So another thing that you said that was very interesting, that I thought on one of the interviews that you did, was that, hey, you know what? Like, you may never be 100%, and that's okay. There's always going to be shit wrong. Why don't you talk to us about that a little bit? Because I thought that was very poignant and powerful, and I haven't heard a lot of people speak truth the way you did there.
Yeah. So I think what you're pointing. So thank you for sharing your own personal journey. That's a pretty common journey, and one of the things that a lot of people can look at, that maybe this will help our listeners take a peek at this, is like your panic attack. Let's say you had a mosquito bite on your elbow that was bugging you, and you just finally got, like, you got 2 weeks and couldn't reach it and trying, and it got bigger and bigger, and you finally decided, darn, I better go to a doctor. And you go to a doctor and he says, oh yeah, I seen those mosquito bites. I got, just like your gastro dude said about just, I got just the medication for you. And what he does instead, he's like, okay, it's only going to hurt for a little bit. And he decides to cut off your arm from the shoulder down. Now, when he does that, and then heals you, it's like, okay, we're done. That's it. Come back in 2 weeks and we'll check to see whether the mosquito bite's still there. And instead, we come back in 2 weeks and they check for that left elbow mosquito bite. And sure enough, There is no left elbow mosquito bite. It's been cured because there is no flipping left elbow anymore, and there's no left arm, and we don't have that diagnosis because we're so myopic about what we're looking at and what we're looking for. This is how psychiatric medicine frequently works. We not only remove the symptom, we remove all capacity to take any kind of experience in from that realm. And so it is a false notion that the condition is treated properly by slicing off the arm for a mosquito bite. So what happens, remind me again the follow-up question that you just, I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Yeah, so I think you're speaking exactly to that. I don't think I had a follow-up question. I think I was just wanting you to speak to that.
Yeah. The idea is that, you know, we aren't inherently broken. There's a world out there, and there's the possibility of really embracing every experience as being an experience that life itself is just offering, whether it's miserable or ecstasy, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
So where do we go from there?
Well, the next place to really go to is that I began to treat people and colleagues, social workers and nurses, other doctors and friends, family and, you know, citizens, a certain way. There was like, you know, opening up this conversation to people who had either been on a lot of medicine or cared for people on a lot of medicine, or people who are, you know, thinking about getting diagnosed or have their children diagnosed. I began to have this conversation, and the thing that was most interesting is that nearly everyone knows that this is true. It is very few there, like, if you really ask them their truth, everyone knows that no one is that shocked. Let's put it that way. Maybe they hadn't thought about it overtly, but no one is that shocked by a system that continues to get worse and worse and worse. Last I looked, this mental illness problem isn't taken care of. Would you agree with that? I mean, there's a fair amount of this stuff going on in the world, and part of that comes from the fact that there are so many people being diagnosed and treated, and that diagnosis and then the follow-up treatment just often creates, at least perpetuates, the conditions they're marketed to deal with.
So what do you do? I mean, Bart, maybe you could help me phrase this in a better way. But what do you do if you're the average person and you're thinking you're gonna go through the system the way it is? Or
yeah, what should you do at that point? Or is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that you've given a profound revelation, right? That I think very few people who don't have a vested interest in one side or the other, and I assume that you're not, and don't take this the wrong way, but you're not a Scientologist, right? And they're against psychiatry for their own reasons, and you know, you're not going to enlist them in some weird cult or whatever. You're an actual doctor, and you're saying, hey, you know, maybe there's a better way. Mm-hmm. What's the better way?
Yeah, I think what I'm also trying to ask is, there are people in a lot of pain right now, or your mom has anxiety, or she can't fall asleep, or one of my good friends is a psychiatrist specializing in pain reduction, people in chronic pain, and his job is to help them with their pain. So those people exist, and those are real problems, and if you have a better solution, that's amazing. In the meantime, you get this big system where people are just craving for some sort of short-term solution. Is it simply people don't have the training and to walk through someone like yourself to find that organic, healthier way to do it? Or is it on such a scale there's just not enough people? Because we're definitely not saying don't ever do drugs and don't just jump off drugs. Like, we're not giving that advice at all.
Not at all.
We're saying there may be a path that won't harm you. So the average person, say my mom has anxiety and she's taking something, how do you want to treat her? How do I help her get over that anxiety and move her slowly to a more organic solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. Well stated. Bart, I think one thing you want to look at is the possibility that these Band-Aids that we're using have razor blades embedded in them. So when I say that the medications, which are, right, a razor blade embedded Band-Aid is going to work for a minute. It will cover the cut for a minute. And then the razor blade will do its job and it'll bleed out of the Band-Aid and you'll think your condition is back. The cut got worse. You'll think the cut naturally got worse, and that's how it goes. And then you'll be like, well, next time I go in, I'm just going to get a bigger Band-Aid. And you get a bigger Band-Aid, a little bit higher dose. Maybe you add a medicine. Maybe you change, maybe you change a medicine. So those are the three things that doctors do with medicine. They can add, they can change, or they can increase. Those are the three choices. Add another one, change to another one, or increase the dose of the present one. We're not even taught how to stop people on medicine. We never were taught. So there's an unspoken rule it's a very unspoken contract when we start medicine, right? When you're with your doctor and he's talking about a medicine, let's see if it works. The idea is that you think that if it doesn't work, he'll just take you off the medicine and roll on. But no, that's not really how it goes. How it goes, he takes you off that medicine, he'll either add, increase, or change your medicine. You're on medicine for the rest of the ride. In almost all the cases, and certainly in psychiatry, you will be on medicine generally for the rest of the ride. So when I talk to people, and again, no disrespect at all to people who are being treated, I'm sure if he's your friend, I'm sure he's a very competent man, fully up to good news, and with respect to a psychiatrist who's taking care of pain management. But if these medications are also causing the symptoms they're marketed to treat, and I maintain that there is at least a good, solid component of that going on with these medications, so that this will be a perpetual state. This patient that he's treating for pain management, we can be pretty sure that 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now, that dude will still be lining up at the pharmacy once a month to get his drugs. I promise, for sure. And he'll be worse off than he is today. I can also promise that. So what is the way out of this? Well, one way is in education, is start getting, look, if we actually pull you off this medicine by reconfiguring, retransforming the narrative that supports its use in the first place, right? If you knew you weren't sick, then you would also knew you didn't need medicine. Now, that doesn't really mean to all of our listeners, like Shaahin's already said, really important to get, that I am not in any way telling you to dump your medicine in the toilet right now and go. Not at all, not at all, not at all. But if we can reconfigure the base conversation, the base narrative, such that one knows himself not to be sick, except perhaps based on the razor blade that's embedded in the so-called virtual Band-Aid, then the possibility exists that without a diagnosis, without a confirmation that there was something wrong with somebody, they would know that they didn't have to take something to make them right. Right? Like if you knew there was nothing wrong with you, then you could know that there's no reason to treat it. Now, this is the interesting space, and I think both of you have kind of brushed up against this, which is you see people talking to themselves in the street, or you see people having panic attacks 4 times a day, or you see people who are, crying and can't get out of bed. And those people are generally already diagnosed with medication. But it looks like the prevailing narrative is that there's a condition under there that isn't responding adequately to the medicine. And what I'm really suggesting here, there are many ways to look at this, but it's possible that the diagnosis and the treatment are actually perpetuating the condition. And it's time to back out only for those people who are ready to do so. Only for those people who are. Look, if what you're doing is working, by all means, more power to you. Don't even think of changing it. Why change horses in midstream? I'm seriously, if what's going on for you and your loved one is working, this is not a request to do anything different. Who I'm speaking with are the people who are sick and tired of getting worse, who are already, they have been to so many doctors and so many hospitals, they've had so many different diagnoses and so many different treatments, and shit keeps getting worse. That's the people who need to really step back, perhaps, and really listen to the possibility that maybe what was declared wrong with them in the first place was inaccurate, and that the possibility exists that we can back off that conversation, bring people back to being whole and perfect as they are, and set them up in another direction using creativity, using nutrition, using meditation and mindfulness, using service to others, using performing arts, all sorts of things that we know that are time tested that actually bring us some degree of sanctity and some degree of health.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think in the last couple of years, especially with COVID and all the stuff that has happened, is discovered that these types of conversation have gone from being nuanced to being polarized. Right? Take the drugs or don't take the drugs. Go to the doctor, don't fucking go to the doctor, right? Believe in this guy or that guy. Like what I'm hearing from your words is that oftentimes these things might be nuanced. Like you're saying, maybe the path is going to be, what happens if you just take less of the drug for a little bit and slowly taper off? What happens if you reduce your dosage into half? Most doctors, from what I understand, aren't trained to deal with those types of things. Like they teach them in medical school, hey, you give them this dosage of this, and it's a one size fit all type of system. Whereas with human beings, we are all individuals, and what it takes to make you better and what it takes to make me better, it could be very different. And just even micro changes to all types of things, the stuff that you're talking about, like meditation, socialization, right? If we have social contact, especially as men, and females too, of course. But what I mean is men hanging around with other strong men that can help bring us up in life as men, or women, around other strong women, creating those social bonds. Those can be as impactful as drugs. There's a great book. I don't know if you've read it, called Spark. Did you ever read this book?
I did.
No. Yeah. So Spark is a book that examines the effects of exercise on the brain. And I recommend it for everyone. I think I got a copy sitting here somewhere, but we should get the author on. And in it, he cites one really interesting study, because I know you brought up Prozac. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was the drug that he was discussing. And he said that there was this double-blind placebo study, and they had women who took Prozac and then women who exercised. And the study shocked the world because regular exercise to exertion for females in particular, landed better results than both placebo and the drug. So as a female, you could say, hey, I believe in science. I only believe in stuff that's double blind, clinically proven. I'm not going for any of this woo-woo shit, but I can just fucking exercise to exhaustion and I don't have to pop the pill. But the problem is both patient and doctor are complicit.
That's right.
Because we don't want to do the work. Most people don't seek discomfort. Most people don't seek discipline. Most people seek, just give me the fucking pill.
Yeah.
Just give me the pill. I was reading about this guy today who invented this stuff, right? And you sprinkle it on your food. And you don't need to exercise and you don't need to diet. And you can lose an incredible amount of weight. What do you think? What do you think happened to this guy?
I don't know.
He made almost $500 million
Yeah, that's what I was
selling this stuff, until they discovered that allegedly, I don't know all the details, but some of the studies that he was doing were fudged, and the allegedly the people who were hired to leave testimonials were just paid actors. But this was a major thing. I mean, major celebrities got on board with this. But it led me to the thought that, yeah, like, we're fucking lazy, man. Most people are fucking lazy. Most people don't want to do the work. So, which brings me to you now, and I think Bart has a question as well. I see him unmuted. So,
yeah, go ahead, Bart.
Well, I wanted just to dive a little bit into sort of the fundamental diagnosis process, because a lot of people, especially Shaahin's, like, they don't know the difference between psychiatrist and psychologist. Yeah. And so the understanding that when you get your blood drawn from a medical doctor and they test that blood and they're looking for, let's say, the coronavirus, is very specific scientific. If I'm understanding the DSM-5 correctly and the book that identifies, quote, psychiatric problems, there is no blood test for any of these purported diseases.
Definitely not.
So let me say if I understand this correctly, because you're the doctor. So every few years they make a book and they diagnose things. I think 20 years ago homosexuality was a disorder, and then they got a lot of shit for it, and then they undiagnosed it in a previous edition. So if you think this is scientific, it feels more like a committee of people sitting around voting on what new names of things to do, and then selling drugs with insurance companies around that. Now, that's simplified it a lot, but is there any scientific sort of medical tests that correlate to these conditions, or is there just a list of symptoms expressed by the patient?
Well, it's a hybrid of that, mostly B and not A. You know, there's certainly no tests that support any particular psychiatric diagnosis. You know, there's chromosome deficiencies and you know, stuff like that lead to psychiatric looking conditions, but those are no longer given a psychiatric diagnosis. They're more associated with the chromosome deficiency. So it can be secondary to other conditions, that there are, you know, organic brain syndromes that are related to some other condition that's going on, you know, that you may have been born with or then picked up along the way. But there is no hard and fast way to actually diagnose any psychiatric diagnosis with hard copy, with pulling blood or taking urine or putting a stick up someone's nose or anything like that. That isn't how we make diagnoses psychiatrically. How we make diagnoses psychiatrically generally is that the public thinks that doctors are like really familiar with all the pieces of the DSM-4 and that we're actually using it to make our diagnosis. But the truth is, over time, we see so many patients every hour that we're looking for buzzwords. So I knew that Shaahin, when he was telling me this story, as soon as he said that his heart was pounding and he thought his heart was going to, I knew already that someone was going to diagnose him with a panic attack. That's all I needed. I was already 10 seconds ahead of Shaahin. I was quite certain that that's how that would go, because that buzzword is stuck to panic attack. As it turns out, panic attack has a whole list of conditions or criteria that has to be met if you're going to actually give that diagnosis. And it's way more than whatever that gastro dude said was a panic attack. He doesn't know anything about the DSM-4 or 5. And the diagnosis, the way it's actually written, includes multiple criteria that he doesn't use, and frankly, neither do psychiatrists. We just look for, okay, a guy like Shaahin says, look, I'm just sitting there and all of a sudden I feel like I'm going to die. I get sweaty palms and my heart's beating out of my chest. What do I got? Oh, you got a panic attack. It's like, you know, and then everyone, it just kind of sidesteps the whole thing. And now you have a psychiatric diagnosis. But not only do you have a psychiatric diagnosis now, you have a psychiatric diagnosis forever. Now you're a dude who had panic attacks. Now you have panic disorder. And now we're giving you benzodiazepines, which, by the way, are going to cause panic. Reliably. Sure. Not only are they going to take your arm off to treat your mosquito bite, but they're actually going to give you panic anyways. And now when the panic comes, you're going to be thinking that the Xanax you are taking isn't a high enough dose. So you're going to update it, get that Band-Aid a little bit bigger. It looks like they covered it, and then the razor blade goes to work, and that's the way the dance goes. Now, I don't mean to implicate the medical system. I actually think it's an amazing business model. After all, they make billions of dollars every single day, so they must have worked it out good. It's really a great model to actually create a system that perpetuates the need to continue to use the system. I mean, Lord knows that's a pretty cool model. That's going to get you a house in the hills ultimately, and that's what happens to these guys. But it isn't the system, because as Shaahin so rightfully said, there's really this idea, there's a complicity not only with the doctors, the person who could stop doing this is actually the person who's putting that pill in their mouth every single day. In the end, that's all. No one is, just because a doctor tells me to do something doesn't mean I have to do it. Like Shaahin was saying earlier, you know, with what do you do with this idea, however you put it there, you know, that we use them, they don't use us, the lawyers, the doctors, etc. If a doctor tells you that you're supposed to eat a little bit of rat poison due to the fact that you're having trouble, dealing with your mother-in-law, that doesn't mean that you should do it.
No, you haven't met my mother-in-law. Oh, that's not for me. Sorry, go ahead.
It's like, really, you get a choice here. And this idea, I need to take medicine, it's all built into the system that gives doctors this super high power and people the idea that if they don't listen to their doctor, they're being a bad citizen.
So, all right. So this is very interesting because I think also on the same token, it's pretty funny that a lot of this technology, a lot of this, the technology of psychiatry, all this stuff, it's fairly new. And a lot of these medicines are fairly new. So I like collecting old encyclopedias. If you can see up there, I've got a few of them from the 1940s and 50s. So from the 1950s, there is a big series of books called the Encyclopedia of Health. And in the 1950s, this was something that was given to doctors that were part of this group, as well as the general public, but doctors had this. And in it, what do you think they were proposing was one of the main causes of consumption or tuberculosis? Take a guess.
Cantaloupes.
What was it?
So fucking random, Bart.
Cantaloupes or antelopes?
No, they were not eating antelopes. That was against the law back then. So they're eating some kind of food that's common, and then they tied it into it.
Yeah.
Or chimney smoke.
Yeah, I could see that it was maybe be smoking or work occupation stuff. I don't know, Shaahin, help us out.
Masturbation, guys. Masturbation. In the 1950s, they believed tuberculosis was caused by masturbation. I have this.
Cantaloupe was correct because you can masturbate with a cantaloupe. I saw it in a movie.
Bart,
I think we were correct on that answer. Thank you.
Some of us can't. Some of us don't have the physiology to get that done, Bart. But I appreciate that you do. Actually, it's kind of good.
Bart and I always joke about who's going to be canceled first, and I think in this evening marks a precedence where it will not be me. No fruit-related issues here. But I will post that. So, but if you think back, like, all right, so this was between 1948 and 1953, they published this thing. Dude, that's not that freaking long ago.
No, it isn't.
We're talking, what is that? 65 years, something like that. Right? Maybe my math's off, but something like that. So 65, that's a blink. Yeah. That's a fucking blink, man. The Vikings controlled all of England for close to 1,200 years. Yeah. We're talking about 60 years. We thought that if you pleasure yourself, that you would get tuberculosis. Yeah. And it's from that same institution that comes this new thought, which, and look, I'm with you. I think that medication, there's a way to use it tactically. We just had Dr. Bruce on, Dr. Michael Bruce, America's sleep doctor. Yeah. And he taught us a lot about how to use caffeine tactically rather than habitually. Yeah. And sure, I think, there's a total place for this. If you get sick, you get a bacteria, antibiotics are fucking great. Like, there's nothing better than a Z-Pack if you've got some crazy bacteria that could potentially kill you. I mean, every time I'm like, dude, like I had a tooth infection once. And I was like, what happens if you just don't do anything? Like, I went to the store, I had antibiotics, it was like $5 copay. I get the antibiotics. I'm good. Like 7 days, 10 days, I'm like golden. But not too long ago, I mean, what are we talking, like turn of the century? Right. You could fucking, people died from that shit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my dad had like 11 brothers and sisters. And I was like, well, why the fuck did he have so many? There's only like 3 left because they just would die off. So you'd have to place your bets. You'd have to find, a fertile wife and like knock out as many as you can because you knew they weren't going to make it. So we're pretty fortunate with that stuff. So, but I get your point. So, okay. So I know that you've got stuff you got to do. We're nearing the end. Tell us more about how people can get a hold of you, how they can learn more about your work. And I know that this is a living live process for you. I know that you're evolving. I know that you're going to be launching a podcast soon and that you'll be making appearances. So people look for Dr. Moss on different podcast feeds, because I know he's going to be doing the podcast circuit and doing some interesting shows. I know we've already got several that he's lined up that I'm excited to hear. But Dr. Moss, tell us more about how people can find you, how people can learn more about your work, and what the next evolution of this is going to be for you.
Sure. So thank you for that. I really already have a podcast that's pretty great. It's the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And we have a number of really fabulous conversations, including one just the other day. I mean, each and every one of those is so much fun. I invite your listeners, our viewers, to take a peek at that. That's at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. And then there's another podcast that we're looking at called Insanity. That's two different words. And that's the one you're talking about, Shaahin, where we've already taped 15 of them, and we're looking at post-production at this point and moving those up to the high scale. So those should be released within the next month or so, with 2 weeks to a month. And I'm also involved with this program that I'm calling the True Voice Podcasting. So True Voice Podcasting is an opportunity for me to assist people to really find what it is that's important to them. The same kind of thing, like get out of your duplicity, the things that really matter to you, the things that are really important to you. What would it take for you to get really aligned with that? And the gift that these people get, these participants in this program, would be that within about 3 months, and perhaps less than that, they would have their own working high-class podcast where they indeed, like you're doing now and like I do, really be able to speak their truth in a self-expressed way in this, using this particular platform methodology that still is not subject, as for some reason, as we sit here today, not subject to the cancel culture at nearly a level that most of the other platforms are. So, you mentioned that you thought I'm not a life coach, and as it turns out right now, what I would call myself is a transformational or restorative coach. So in fact, as the undoctor, which is the name that I'm affectionately known as, what I do is I walk people off their diagnoses, walk people off their medications, and give them their life back. And, all of this is aligned with just being, like, just getting your real self, your real unbroken self, coming to grips with the idea that the mistakes you're making, the stuff you're doing that you wish you weren't doing, the stuff that's happening to you that you really think shouldn't be, are all part of the human experience. Coming to grips with that, embracing that, holding that off, and then communicating that with others. It seems to me that podcasting is one great way to do that. So my life as a podcaster is the next career, as I really hand off this life as a conventional psychiatrist this upcoming Saturday. I'm moving into podcasts at full speed, like, Mach 1, straight speed ahead.
I love that. And I'll talk to you off air about that. I've got some ideas for you on that.
Cool.
All right. So, and if people want to get a hold of you for your coaching and whatnot, how can people reach you? Is it through welcometohumanity.net?
Yeah, that would be one place. If you want to just email me, Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net is probably the best space to do that. I'm also on the regular social media networks. I'm on Facebook, and mostly use Facebook and LinkedIn, but these days I'm being coached into using everything from, Pinterest to Twitter to Insta. So Snapchat, TikTok, but really the two that I like to frequent, if I frequent any right now, is Facebook and LinkedIn.
I love that. All right. Awesome. And my co-host, Bart, if people want to get a hold of you and learn more about all the cool stuff that you're doing, how do people find you?
Yeah, please follow me. Bart Baggett on Twitter as well as Instagram and on Facebook, BartBaggett. And I'd love to get some emails, some fans, some give you some free books, a lot of good resources I've developed over the last 25 years as an author and a speaker. So let's reach out. And then of course hit the subscribe button so you get a notification next time we go live on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah, next time when I figure all that stuff out.
Bart, on this, if I contact you, can I learn this thing, the methodology about this cantaloupe thing?
Jesus Christ.
That is from a movie, a very, very popular movie.
Wasn't that a pie? Wasn't it American Pie?
Yeah, it's a reference everybody knows, Fred. I'm not getting stuck with making that joke. I'm just referencing American Pie. I dissociate myself with that humor.
Bart makes fun of me for saying stuff that he thinks will get us canceled. And then he just comes out with a zinger out of left field where you're like, oh, okay, buddy. Fruits, huh? All right. I'm checking the not child-friendly box in our live stream from now on. All right, guys. Well, and I'm Shaahin. Guys, the book is out now, Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. The first chapter is available for free on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever podcasts are found. And if you're listening to this, the Audible audiobook will be out within the next 2 weeks. So if you want to wait for that, do that. If not, get a hold of the book. We've got a limited drop now of hardcover books. The softcover will be available in about 30 days, but the book is available. If you're interested and excited about checking that out, please do so. Let us know what you think. Make sure to subscribe and like, and check us out on the next episode. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Dr. Moss, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Shaahin. Nice to see you there, Bart. And I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.